Hello, builders. We would love to welcome you to this episode of the Build Your Success podcast. Here at the Build Your Success podcast, we like to build you so you can build others. We do that through our coaching, training, and our workshops, but we also do that through the guests that we bring to this podcast. I'm grateful today to have Brian Sanders. Brian is a market leader with COhatch. COhatch is a new way to work, more than co-working. COhatch is a way to work, meet, and live. Brian is a Tampa Bay native, so he's local here, Central Florida, like I am, and he grew up in St. Pete. Brian and his wife have raised their 6 children in Tampa and are deeply committed to the well-being of the area. Brian is a social entrepreneur, and we'll talk more about that and why he joined COhatch today. But Brian, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, man. It's good to be here.
It's so exciting to have you on the podcast. And we're going to do what we do with all of our guests. We're going to ask you our signature question. What does leadership and being a leader mean to Brian Sanders?
Wow. I guess you're a big John Maxwell fan, right? He would say maybe leadership is influence. I can't deny that, of course, but I think for me, dude, the older I get, leadership is about love. It's kind of like, do you love the thing you're doing? Do you love the people you're working with? And I increasingly find it difficult to find any dimension or definition of leadership that does not include that. So that probably has something to do with power too, like the use of power, which influences kind of relational power or whatever. So for me, I probably would have been styled a leader my whole life in different forms, organizational, political, social leader. But more and more I just think, man, what is leadership without love, without the love of your community, the thing you're doing, the people you're with, the actual outcomes of what it is you're leading people toward. So I suppose there probably is a version of leadership that's loveless, but it's not for me, and probably I would be in favor of maybe trying to remove that somehow from the world. So I don't know. Yeah, that's just what came to mind.
Brian, we began asking this question after episode 69. We had a guy by the name of Larry Levine on the podcast. He wrote the best-selling book, Selling from the Heart. And Larry encouraged me to ask a signature question, and we started doing that. And that led to this book we have, Voices for Leadership. I have now asked that question of 70 people on the podcast, and I've asked it probably over another 50 people when I interview them about our book, the Voices for Leadership book. I get a different answer every time. This is the first time I've heard leadership is love. And that is amazing. I'm learning that leadership is kind of like DNA. We all have our own ways to lead. We were asking for diverse society and respect diversity, and we need to respect diversity in leadership. And I think it's just great. You mentioned John Maxwell. John Maxwell has a lot of laws and principles, and those are great. However, I've been learning they may not be applicable to everyone. And so we need to be cautious that we don't apply, principles and laws to everything in life. So that some things we have some flexibility with.
Well, leadership also doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It's something applied endemic to the time in which we live. So probably also we're responding to sort of errors in leadership, and we're constantly evolving our notion of leadership. Not progressively, like it's better and better and better over time, but it's like correcting mistakes that are being made in leadership. So I think in the last maybe 20, 30 years, there's been a real expose on a misuse of power from leaders. So then what does that do? That makes us think more deeply about maybe there's these other elements of leadership, which has to do with servanthood or has to do with the advancement of others, not just your own goals or your own needs. And so, some of it is like responding to, right? Leadership is many things, but right now what it needs to be is this or that or whatever. So I wonder if that's also part of it, that it's evolving.
I think you're right. And that is, a great way to lead into what we're going to talk about today, about the new ecology of work. In fact, we faced the great resignation, and we're talking about these quiet quitters. And I heard, I heard yesterday the application of people being quietly fired, where they don't really fire them, but they just don't use them like they used to. And so that is created, in the pandemic, this 2 years of just working from home and all these different things. And in the middle of this, someone starts this thing called COhatch, and that's what you're involved with. Tell us about why COhatch is different and how you intentionally design a co-working space.
Well, maybe it would be helpful to maybe make it a personal connection to COhatch. I most of my career has been spent in kind of the nonprofit world, and in 2007 we created a nonprofit incubator, which has helped to encourage an accelerator to sort of build and grow um, thousands, really, actually, nonprofits all around the world. And so when I sort of gave that organization, which I founded, over to a younger executive team, because I just thought it needed to be run by younger people than me, um, I was looking for something, and this is when I met the guys at COhatch. It's a Columbus-based, it's an Ohio-based company, which is pretty. It's now densely growing in the Midwest, but it's kind of farthest reach now is trying to open in Florida. But I'll tell you, the reason why I was drawn to it is because it's not, look, co-working itself is a sort of important idea in our time. Just the idea of sharing, like a shared economy, that I could buy my own office for my, say, 10-person team, and whatever that outlay is, and I have to have a break room, and I have to have meeting rooms, and I have to have a copy machine, and I have to have pay the light bill and whatever. Uh, or I could share that space with another company, and so just starting to think about that, I just think that's a breakthrough idea in the last maybe 20 years, is that this idea of a sharing economy. There's money to be made, there's advantage to be gained in reciprocity and mutuality, and beginning to see each other as collaborators, not competitors. That whole notion about what business is changing, like, before our eyes. So that's important anyway. But then these guys had this sort of additional culture or thing of, like, they cared about the cities and the communities where they wanted to build these locations, these sites. So just as a contrast to other big box kind of co-working brands, which don't own real estate. So, for example, just actually saying we're gonna be here, we're gonna buy this real estate, not just rent it, but own it, and become a part of these communities, and then understand what's rich about them, understand the assets, and then find a way to lift, even to restore old buildings, and become a part of solutions for communities. So that really drew me in because of my own concern for nonprofits, and then this idea of, like, creating these mixed economy ecosystems, essentially. So not just for-profit businesses sharing a space and networking together and lifting each other's businesses, but actually not for-profit and civic and startups and for-profit enterprise all in the same space, somehow kind of enriching each other, cross-pollinating each other. I'm really interested in that. That feels to me like, I don't know, a sort of cutting edge for how things grow. The whole idea of network effects, network technology, that actually we're moving, how power is distributed in the world right now is less about institutions or hierarchies and more about networks, nodes in networks, and we're joining networks because we see the power of networks. And essentially COhatch is, like, has that in its heart. And so maybe it's back to the idea of love. Like, there's a component of, like, we want to love the places we are, the people we work with, the visions people have for their companies or for their nonprofits or whatever. So all of that really drew me in. And honestly, I just think it's a learning thing. It's for me personally, I want to see how it goes, and I want to see how we are changed by these environments, what we learn from them, um, how we learn to thrive and flourish, not just as individuals, but as businesses and as communities and so on. So that's probably a really long answer to your question, but I think it's personal for me. I probably would still be just doing nonprofit stuff, dabbling a little bit in for-profit ventures, but being drawn more into this side of things because of that mixed view of it, like, of everyone benefiting, and really being a platform, a service platform. So not just B2B, like, not just like we are a business that sells to businesses, but actually we want to create a platform where all of our members or all of our businesses can thrive, can flourish. And that in of itself is a kind of new idea, new social technology of not just sort of selling something to businesses, but actually creating a platform where every business can somehow benefit.
Yeah, Brian, it's exciting. And I'll just give my little backstory on the COhatch experience. I got invited to do a tour of the new construction here in Lakeland, Florida. And I love to see construction sites. That's my 28-year background is construction. And I say I went from building buildings to now I like to build people. And when I visited, as you alluded to, for the last 20 years, the whole co-working thing, it's been amazing. It's been invigorating and thriving. But the scale that I saw COhatch doing it on and realizing you're not just co-working with people in your local community, you can network across the COhatch community. And that to me, that's a game changer where you can actually work with and be a member and show up in another city and be able to use that space. That's going to change things, in my opinion. The whole co-working thing, again, is amazing. And some of our local providers here, they do a wonderful job. And I know you're collaborating with some of them. But to realize this is a network of people across the system. You're basically creating an ecosystem for people to thrive in. It's just, I think it's innovative. And that's why I want to have you on the show as a leader.
Yeah, that is interesting because it's almost like in a local community, you want to network, you want to know businesses. And look, Lakeland is so like that. I mean, I'm falling in love with Lakeland because Lakeland just has this kind of, it's growing, it's forward thinking, but it also has this kind of small town, we look out for each other thing. There's such a thread of philanthropy that runs through the city and the way business is done. And so it's a lovely place, an amazing place to work. But even seeing that community, which is networked together, probably also needs to extend networks into Tampa and St. Pete and Clearwater and Orlando and Bartow and all the places we do business and all the places where we actually need to, so it's actually networks of networks. So us starting off by building 4 locations in this sort of West Central Florida and wanting to build probably another dozen in the next couple of years. I think it's to your point. It's understanding that's what we need. Actually, we have business relationships, we have friendships, we have nonprofit connections, not just in Lakeland, but in these sort of neighboring cities in the region in which we live. So you're right. It's part of it.
Let's talk about the whole cultural change. We've dabbled around it with this, but this whole, working from home, hybrid working, people that have decided to start their own business, and it is easy to do because of technology, because of networking. Talk about the cultural change and what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of studies out. I've seen different numbers. The work from anywhere movement, which actually started, I want to say, in the late '70s. There were certain kind of government-based businesses which tried it. But that obviously is emerging in a new, different way in our time. But one study I saw is people are 16% more productive when they're allowed to work from home or work from anywhere. Another one I saw, which their term was radical flexibility, like giving people the freedom to work at the office, to work from home, to work from a coffee shop, to work from a co-working space, whatever. In other words, to make that decision yourself, where am I most productive? And on this given day, what kind of work do I need to do? And what's the best location for that? Increases productivity by, say, 19%. I think that was one of the surprises from COVID, is that when people had to go home and work at home, people said, well, there goes productivity. Like, it's just going to go in the garbage can. And that just isn't what happened. Now, I know some people probably, took a long time to make a grilled cheese sandwich or something, or maybe weren't putting their shoes on, but across the board, the numbers are that people were more productive. They got more done, and that's really interesting to consider what that means and why. Probably there's a guy called Cal Newport who wrote a really great book called Deep Work. He makes the argument that we've lost, because of the way we work, because of the speed in which we work, and because we're constantly have to talk to people, we don't have that space to do that deep thinking. That's sort of like get into a groove and not be interrupted, And so there is a need for that. And maybe that's a part of what flexibility does, is it allows you time and space to create room for deep work, to have 4 hours uninterrupted or something. And what you can get done, the kind of work that can be done, not just for knowledge workers, but for a lot of people in a lot of their jobs, they need a little bit of uninterrupted time, and increasingly that's hard to get to, So I think that's probably one of the dynamics is learning that we need to give people the freedom to get out of the office, so to speak. And now it's hard to come back from that. Once you've tasted that, like my I have a grandson, he's 4 now, but my daughter is vegetarian. So he eats like broccoli stalks, like for a snack, he'll just have, which makes no sense. But recently he got a hold of some candy. And so now he's not interested in broccoli, like once you've tasted sugar, it's really hard to go back to, I want a carrot for a snack or something. So this is part of it, is like we've tasted that freedom, that productivity, that sort of creative control over our work environments. And now even corporate clients that we work with, we're starting to realize they're looking and they're saying, we have a certain amount of money, a certain amount of outlay that we can do for officing, but we don't think we can force our people to all come back every single day. So they're doing a hybrid where they let them work from home, some come back, but now you have this massive square footage that you have to pay for, that's really only being used a quarter of the time or a third of the time. So it just begs the question, what's the next iteration then? Because look, there's a paradox here, Brian. I mean, I think you know this, like if you just let people work from home the whole time, they'll get a lot of deep work done, but they'll get no teamwork done, right? They'll get no, so I think the knock-on effect from working from home in COVID was we lost relationships, we lost communication started to fail. So there is a paradox. We really need to give people the freedom to work from home, and that radical flexibility is a powerful tool in the next iteration of work. But we still have to create stability, and we still have to create strong relational communal components for the people that work with us and work for us. So there it is. I mean, that's the horns of the dilemma. How do we have a stable workplace and allow people freedom to work wherever they want? And this is part of what I think something like COhatch, but other iterations too, are trying to solve that problem for us. Essentially, create places where you can come and go, access to meeting rooms where you can have team meetings once a week or even once a day, and then you could stay and work there with people if you need that relational connection, or you could dip out, or you can find a private space in the co-working area. That I think that kind of the point is flexibility and stability. Those things have to be held in tension. Relationship and freedom to work alone or work at home. And look, some people, we all worked from home and we got sick of like our dog, and we got sick of our kids screaming in the background or whatever. So it's like even enjoying the freedom and flexibility to work from home, you also still wish you could sometimes go in and wish you could sometimes get somewhere that feels a little more professional, or where you can mix with people, which also is part of the deal. If we all just work from home, our networking is just going to tank. And because a lot of the way business is done now is through relationships, where are we building those relationships? That's a puzzle we have to solve.
I love the fact you bring up all the different scenarios and how people have to do some stability and some flexibility. I was a guest on a Fox affiliate in Charleston several months ago now, and they were talking about returning back to work and the hybrid. And the one thing that I would just encourage anybody I'm coaching or training or any business I'm working with, we have to have clear expectations and clear ground rules. If we're going to work 2 days a week at home and 3 days, we need to make sure everybody understands that, and that we're going to lay those expectations out clearly, so we don't have one person doing this and another person doing that. It's just not fair. Now, some companies can just have open policies, and that's what, back to that, whole leadership thing, DNA is different. Every organization has their own culture, but some people need that interaction with others and that team building, and others can absolutely work by themselves. And I think you got to understand that and recognize what the culture of the business is, and what the team wants, and ask questions and make sure that we're all on the same page and the expectations are laid out.
Yeah, it's well said. That's exactly right.
Well, Brian, we are at the end of our podcast. This time flew fast here. It's great was talking about how these cultural changes are coming, not just for your, COhatch, but other workplaces, these hybrids, all this stuff. I'm looking forward to the energy it brings to the industry. And again, I just hope that everyone recognizes that it needs to be designed, as you said, be intentional with the design of the workspace, but also be intentional with the policies and procedures to make it effective and productive. So where can our guests find out more about you and more about COhatch? Our listeners, not our guests.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, cohatch.com is a great place to go. You'll see that we are kind of building in Florida and expanding there. So we'd love to give you a tour, show you around if that's something you're interested in one of the 4 cities we're currently building in. But yeah, I just want to kind of echo what you said a second ago, like listening to our people. What an amazing novel idea that is. And maybe that's like, how can we lead people we don't really know and we don't really understand? And that sort of, you can't design something. I mean, all of design thinking teaches us that you start with empathy. You start with like the user. And so I love that. Maybe that's a good sort of parting thought, is thinking about the people we lead are also the people that we're committed to their thriving, their flourishing, whatever we want them to do well, so that our businesses can do well, our enterprise can do well. So yeah, and COhatch wants to be a part of that. So I think it's genuine. I think so if someone listening needs something like that or is looking for something like that, we'd love to partner with you in that.
Well, Brian, again, thank you for your time today. And for those that are listening to the podcast, we'll include that in the show notes, how to get in touch with Brian and find out more about COhatch. I appreciate you listening to the podcast today. Do me a favor, go over to wherever you're listening to this, leave us an honest rating and review. Share this podcast with others. I know someone in your network could learn from some of the things Brian shared with us today. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Remember to build yourself and then build others.